Attention, attention, which is, of course, English for Achtung, Achtung. Perhaps it should be tally-ho, tally-ho today, James.
Yes, it should be,
really, after all, tally-ho, tally-ho. After all, it's Battle of Britain Day today, isn't it? There's no other language to
Little
open the
job
show.
seen at Angels 18.
A friend of mine, a South African comic, said that his dad was in the South African Air Force, and they all still used tally-ho. So it's all like that. It's tally-ho, tally-ho, boys.
Tally-ho, tally-ho.
Tally-ho. Anyway,
I'm on it, Pete.
Right. Well, anyway, we've done an awful lot. I think it's fair to say an awful lot on the Battle of Britain in recent months. And I know you've enjoyed it enormously, but it is a subject we do like to return to. And we know, dear listener, you don't mind the occasional mention of Spitfires and fighting in the skies over Kent. And, well, James Holland, who knows a thing or two about this subject, is with me, of course. James, a simple question this. Very often, I think sometimes you have to ask you do have to ask the daft question sometimes, because maybe they go unanswered. I mean, after all, it's the 17th of September soon, and that's when they celebrate the Battle of Arnhem or commemorate the Battle of Arnhem, because that's when it began, right? That one's pretty easy. But the Battle of Britain did not begin on September the 15th. Why today? Why not Adlertag? Why the 15th?
Well, I think it was because it was seen as the sort of culmination of the battle, and it was also reported at the time as the day of heaviest Luftwaffe losses. Right. RAF claims were 174, and it took a little while to kind of sort of unravel that and show that actually it wasn't anything like that. It was actually only 61. But that's neither here nor there. And also, I think it was a very visible battle. It was a very clear, sunny day. It was sort of actually not at all dissimilar to today, warm mid-September weather, blue skies, a few fluffy white cumulus, and that was it. And I suppose because the two big raids of the day focused over London, and London was the biggest city, of course, and the centre of the whole British Empire and all the rest of it, it was just so visible. Everyone could see that this was a monster battle. And although the battle continues, on into the autumn and frankly beyond the 31st of October, which is the official end of the Battle of Britain, it just felt like the biggie. It just felt like the big day, I think. And as though a kind of sort of a corner had been turned in the eyes of those who are sort of watching it and those who were actually kind of trying to fight it and command it.
Well, it's sort of they've done their worst, haven't they? They try it's the kitchen sink on September the 15th, isn't it? Yeah. By the Germans, and so you repulse that, you beat that, or at least you stop it sufficiently. Yes. And everyone notices, I suppose the 15th fits into the sort of. I know this is a thing Churchill says later, but it's not the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. You know what I mean? It's certainly the point at which a point of no return, in fact, for the Luftwaffe, isn't it? Yeah, no. I mean, they're really up the creek by this point, and particularly in terms of single-engine fighter planes, I especially. The bomber force is just being sort of attrited, so its punch factor is just being lessened. And although obviously, if you happen to be in Coventry in November, you might kind of strongly disagree with that statement. But generally, as a kind of force that can overwhelm Britain and the RAF, the bomber force has lost its punch. The Stukas, which amounted to kind of sort of 350 of them or something like that. They've been withdrawn from the battle by this stage. Yeah. Yeah. Single engine fighters are down to about kind of sort of, 250, 300 in number. They started the battle with sort of 740, something like that. Yeah. So they're really being kind of whittled down again and no chance of kind of replacing the losses. So, or not anytime soon. Also, you just said, it's really interesting, though, we've talked about it before, those recorded conversations with captured pilots that they held at Trent Park in northeast London. And you do see an absolute key change in those transcriptions of those conversations. About this time, those who are kind of sort of, we're going to whip their asses and we're going to win and Hitler's great and so's Goering. That kind of conversation is being replaced by, this is an absolute joke. They told us they were kind of, the RAF was beaten, but they're clearly not. Yeah. The latter kind of phrase and conversation is starting to come into the conversation a lot more. You see this kind of sort of dip in morale, and that's because they're just been overflown and they're just, they're not, they haven't achieved what they were
told they were going to achieve. But I do think it's, I'm very interested in this whole idea, which is sort of really prompted, I suppose, by kind of when we had Phil Payson O'Brien on and talking about sort of, crunching the data. And crunching the data is very fashionable these days, isn't it? I was playing cricket with Jared Kimber the other day, who's the great cricket data analyst. Yeah. And of course, you've got Moneyball, haven't you, famously, with in baseball and so on. And it is interesting when you actually start kind of taking away what people say in memoirs and what has become the kind of the myth and actually start doing some number crunching. Number crunching obviously has to be kind of done in context with human experience as well, because number crunching doesn't tell you everything at all. But it is interesting nonetheless. And actually, Guy Walters, our friend, yesterday gave me this Admiralty Ships of the Royal Navy Statement of Losses during the Second World War. And it's this whole booklet of every single vessel that was lost. And again, it's just sort of completely opens your eyes to kind of...
It's quite thin, that book.
Well, it is and it isn't, because it's, total 1,500 lost. The 15,000 or something. It's a frick of a lot. Total, yeah.
From the hood down.
And a lot of these are landing craft and stuff, but 15,000 aircraft, 15,000 ships is a huge number. Anyway, I've sort of, I'm still to go through it, but I thought it'd be interesting. But I do think it'd be interesting to actually just look at exactly what did happen on the 15th of September.
Yeah.
Rather than just the kind of anecdotes of kind of huge great air battles over London. Because it started fine. Visibility was really good. Clouds started to develop steadily, but very kind of high cumulus. Mid-afternoon, there was some quite thick cloud. 8 tenths, 10 tenths at around 4,000 to 6,000 feet. And clear after that, but beautiful in the morning, middle of the day. First Luftwaffe recce planes seen over the west and northwest between 0900 and 1100. A Heinkel 111 was the first plane to be shot down that day, which was over Bolt Head, which is near Kingsbridge in Devon, soon after 9 a.m. A lone Heinkel 111. What the heck's that doing there? And then nothing in the southeast at all until after 10 a.m. There is an increase.
Which outfit's that Heinkel from?
Who knows?
Unless he's flying, towing a great big radar reflector. Unless he's flying a great big radar reflector to try and spook the Air Force, the RAF, into thinking there's something coming. That is extraordinary.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me just see if I can look it up.
Anyway,
nothing in the southeast until after 10 a.m. when there's an increase of German patrols over the Straits of Dover.
Right.
Which again is just saying we're coming in large scale over the Straits of Dover and we're just sort of clearing the airways a little bit beforehand. And then by 11 a.m. it's clear from radar, from RDF, the RDF changes, it was called radio direction finding as it was known at the time. It's clear that there's something brewing. And what this means is you're starting to pick up formations of bombers taking off from their airfields. And what they do is they all circle around from their airfields and then all form up, just as the 8th Air Force was doing later on in the war. And then the first wave is over London between 11:30 a.m. and 12:45. And it's 11:30 that the first German forces cross Kent at Manston. Around that area. And
it's quite interesting that it's quite late, isn't it? When's
takes
dawn?
them half an hour to form up.
Yes, but when's dawn?
It's probably about 6:45, isn't it, by that
time? So they're taking their time, like delivering this maximum punch, aren't they? That they aren't all taking off, forming up at dawn.
No.
And obviously, when you start thinking about it, what you can't do in this situation is, it's not like a ground attack where what you do is you douse the opposition with artillery before you make your move. You can't do that in this context. So you say they send fighters up to patrol the Straits of Dover. What's the point of that? Apart from, I suppose, you scramble some squadrons, the RAF scrambles some squadrons who then have to land again and be refueled and rearmed. That you cause a delay.
Well, no, actually, not at all. No, not at all.
So they don't buy it. Yeah, they don't buy it. Yeah.
First takeoff is 11:05, which is 72 and 92 Squadron.
Yeah.
Ordered to patrol Canterbury at 25,000 feet.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about this it suddenly becomes clear that it's a biggish formation,
Yeah.
single formation. So that gives the controllers at 11 group, i.e. Keith Park and all the rest of it, and the ground controllers in that room at Uxbridge, in that bunker at Uxbridge. That gives them the time to couple 10 squadrons together.
Yeah.
And also bring reinforcements from 10 and 12 group, all before 11:30 when the first planes cross go. So you see 11:05, 72 and 92 squadron scrambled, 11:15, 229 and 303 squadron, which of course is the Poles. 11:15 also 17 and 73 squadrons from Debden. 253 and 501 squadron from Kenley.
Yeah.
11:20, 504 squadron and 257 squadron from Martlesham.
Yeah.
11:20, 603 squadron from Hornchurch. 11:20, 609 squadron from Middle Wallop to patrol the Brooklands, Windsor at 15,000 feet. 11:25, 242, 19, 302, 310 and 611, all from Duxford to patrol. So that's the big wing. And they're all crossing. The most of the Germans have crossed the Kent coast between 11:33 and 11:40 in 3 columns. They then flew north and turned towards Maidstone, then spread out and head towards London. Maximum 40 bombers, possibly as few as 20, most from 1 KG-76. 2 grouping of fighters. So the total formation is only about 100.
Yeah.
And they're all immediately engaged, and they're just henpecked the whole way. As they come up, successive squadrons which are patrolling all that whole leg of Kent and all round South London just go at them the whole time. And the peak of is around sort of 12:30 over London.
Yeah.
Most bombs are landing, around down sort of, midday-ish, between midday and 12:30.
Yeah.
But pretty light. An electricity station at Beckenham is hit. A bomb lands in the garden in the front of Buckingham Palace, famously.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's pretty sporadic.
But is this the attack when the Dornier goes down on the Victoria
No, I think
Station?
that's later that afternoon.
Right.
And then the number of bombs suggests only about 30 maximum bombers attacking.
You see...
which is nothing. It's absolutely nothing.
And up against how many squadrons of Spitfires? I mean, Spitfires and Hurricanes. I mean, that's the wrong way round in terms of the myth, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah. So the RAF loses 20 fighters in that engagement, destroyed and 5 damaged, 7 pilots killed. The Luftwaffe loses 10 bombers and 20 fighters. So if you're attacking forces between 25 and 30, and you've lost 10, you've lost a third of your attacking force.
It's not.
Just
that's
like
not
that.
a good.
That's not good. But but that is not the main event. The main event is the one that peaks around kind of 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so again, there's the first signs of Germans massing in northern France about 1:45 p.m.
Yeah.
But no formation that can be detected by radar at all. It starts moving westwards towards Britain until just after 2 o'clock, about 2:05.
Yeah.
And we've got 12 British squadrons in the air by 2:05.
Yeah.
And again, they're scrambled in pairs, which is the way, they'd be scrambled with a Hurricane and a Spitfire squadron. So the Hurricane would be at 15,000 feet, the Spitfire at kind of 25,000 feet or whatever.
Yeah.
You've also got, so my friend Alan Wright, who was in 92 Squadron, he was also flying up at kind of 35,000 feet as a spotter. So he moved down early in the morning down to, I think it was Hawkinge, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
Took off, and so he was an extra set of eyes. So you've got the observer corps on the ground, you've got radar, and you've got Alan up there radioing back going, I can see them, they're all coming, here they are.
Blimey.
Because he could see the whole shooting match.
Yeah, you can see the whole of the whole of southern England,
Yeah. So again, it's 3 German forces. The observer corps struggling a little bit because cloud is starting to build up over that afternoon. But the total is around 300 German aircraft, of which 100 are bombers, 200 are fighter escort. It's 100 bombers. I mean, it's really pretty small beer.
Well,
in the big scheme of things.
And after all, they're not, they're not heavies either, are they? So it's 100 twin engine bombers, isn't it? It's not your great dirty payloads that you get later on in the war from the British.
Yeah. And they're coming in 3 columns, all going in a row. So you've got southern column, which is Dornier 17s, middle bombers, which is a mixture of Heinkel 111s and Dornier 17s, and you've got Northerly Stream, which is Heinkel 111s. And, most of the Luftwaffe fighters were reluctant to engage. That is the reports from the British fighters. Yeah.
Well, that ties into what you're saying about the pilot's morale beginning to go in those recorded conversations. Is that after all, it's well into the battle, isn't it? It's that long flight across the channel. You haven't got long. If you get shot down, you're not going home. Yeah. There's plenty of reasons for the fighter escort pilots to be reluctant to get stuck in, isn't there? It's all quite understandable, isn't it? Actually, that aspect of it, especially by this stage of the battle when things have started going wrong. And would they have known about the first wave and how the first wave had done, these people, or would they not know? How much internal chatter was there in the Luftwaffe between the different?
Well, hardly any, because they can't. They can communicate within each staffel, each squadron, but they can't communicate.
But so this, groups. This early, the mid morning, the noon formation goes over, and they get mauled. There's no two ways about that. Yeah. But do the next lot coming? Have they had someone on the phone go, "Fuck me, it was terrible this morning"? Do they know? Or
no, I don't think they would do. And the other thing is that once you're in the air, the fighters can't talk to the bombers.
Yes.
And the bomber streams can't talk to, the northerly, southerly, middle one can't talk to each other. So they're absolutely on their own. I mean, it's really interesting that what you find is that they come up and they're trying to hit. So if you think of Kent, and it's sort of slightly angled, isn't it, towards the sort of the northwest. So they're going to be hitting southeast London. That's where they're going to be hitting. What you've got also, you've got those squadrons from 11 Group to the north of London, Debden, which at that point is in 11 Group, Hornchurch, North Weald. They're all coming southwards to intercept. So you've got the Luftwaffe sort of coming up, and you've got them coming down. Yeah. You've also got the big wing coming into the action a little bit later. I mean, the first bombing comes around kind of sort of 2:50 p.m. And the absolute height of the engagement is between that period and 3:15. And the biggest entanglements are between the fighters are between the big wing when it eventually pitches up, and the Debden fighters. So all those ones that are coming from kind of sort of North Essex, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire, that kind of way. But I mean, only 4 British pilots killed that time. Which is for a big engagement is not that many. I mean, I've added up all the squadrons that are involved, and I reckon there were 335 Hurricanes and Spitfires engaging 300 German planes in total.
Right. So
and 335 Spitfires and Hurricanes, that means they've got superiority. Now, the difference, of course, is that if you are in your single squadron from Debden, you are still only one of 12 attacking, maybe a formation of however many when you hit them. And you're going to be outnumbered, but collectively you're not. I mean, it's 12 squadrons involved from 10 Group, 26 squadrons from 11 Group, 15 squadrons from 12 Group, and 12 squadrons from 13 Group. So that's 240 Spitfires and Hurricanes from 11 Group.
I mean,
and Luftwaffe intelligence on that day is that the RAF has 177 fighters left.
Yeah, but
in actual fact, they have 659.
But surely the minute
actually
everyone
ready to go that day.
Everyone lands and they say to their squadron intelligence officer, "You told me there were no Spitfires and Hurricanes left." And he goes, "Look, I can only tell you what I'm given from the boss." There's clearly, what it must do for morale, where you're told one thing when you get in the aircraft in the morning, and then you get over the target, you get to the battlefield, and what you were told is totally wrong. That must really
well, yes, but you're probably never going to see 335, are you? You're going to see
but you were told there was no one, that they're done for, that there's going you've achieved air supremacy or superiority, and you're going to it's going to be a walk in the park, and then it definitely isn't. I mean, I mean, how the Luftwaffe's morale. I mean, again, we often come to these sort of moments in a lot of the battles we talk about where you think, how on earth did they sustain their morale when it was going this badly?
Well, I mean, but what's absolutely clear is that morale amongst the Luftwaffe units, particularly the fighter units, is absolutely tanking at this point.
Yeah.
Because they don't have enough aircraft, and so that means that you're having to fly more and more sorties. You know, if you've got some greenhorns turn up, you're not going to send them over in your only, one of your four Messerschmitt 109s that you've got in your Staffel. So you go up again, which is why you have this sort of ludicrous situation where you have some Luftwaffe pilots flying as many as 7 sorties in a day. So nearly all those who've flown on the first lot, on the first wave in the morning, would have also flown in the one in the afternoon.
What would that do for your nerve? I mean, if you're flying 7... I mean, because after all, so much of this is you're living on your nerves. I mean, you've got to pick yourself up, and let's say you have a really hairy flight and you're nearly killed, or
you only just make it back,
or you see your best mate go down in flames, or explode in front of your eyes, and you land, and you probably have a cup of coffee and a fag while they're revitling the aircraft, and you get back in the thing and off you go. I mean, dear God, I mean...
but we talked about Heinz Knocker before, in his diary that he kept. He's shot down something like 9 times in the Second World War, and he still sort of gets back up and off he goes again, and, it sort of just gets worse and worse and worse. And I mean, you've read Sicily, all that stuff with Mackie Steinhoff. I mean, Mackie Steinhoff is in the Battle of Britain, and he's still there on Sicily kind of 3 years later. He's absolutely... he's just stuffed. But I mean, just to go back to the 15th of September, RAF Fighter Command, they fly 705 sorties that day, which is a good number. Luftwaffe, 600 in total that have been recorded. So in other words, the RAF Fighter Command is not only flying more sorties than the Luftwaffe are, and a sortie, for those who don't know, is an individual operational flight of an individual aircraft.
Plane takes off and goes away.
Yeah, comes back and lands. Or hopefully lands.
Well, hopefully,
but I mean, an absolute basic rule of thumb is that you need to attack with a 3-to-1 advantage minimum. That isn't happening. The peak on the 15th of September. They're attacking with a inferiority. They're 30-40 planes short of what the Luftwaffe, what the Fighter Command can put up.
Well, and as well as the home advantages and the flying time advantages and all that stuff that you have to factor into Fighter Command's. It's a simple. I mean, it's a simple home advantage, which is that if you're shot down over Kent, you survive, you're stuck in a car and you're back on base soon enough. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a break now. There's so much to talk about, and we have some housekeeping to do for our regular listeners. You're listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. We'll see you in a tick. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, and it's Battle of Britain Day. So we're discussing the Battle of Britain, but this day in particular, and sort of marvelling at some of it because. Well,
let me just give you some stats for the 15th of September, because it's really
crunch those numbers.
I'm going to crunch that data. So claims were 174 Luftwaffe planes shot down by the RAF on that day.
Yeah.
The Luftwaffe claims 185 planes shot down, which, if you remember, the Luftwaffe intelligence was 177 British fighters that day, so they're actually claiming there were
shot down more planes than exist.
Okay, whatever. What is really interesting is the reality. Is that the RAF loses 16 pilots that day and 31 aircraft.
Yeah.
The Luftwaffe actually loses 61 aircraft and 93 pilots and aircrew, all of which are irreplaceable losses. And I do think that's really, really interesting. In other words, although actual planes that were shot down was only double for the Luftwaffe, which is still pretty bad.
Yeah.
That aircrew losses, that is not good.
Yeah. Now,
93 to 16.
15th September, of course, the other reason it's Battle of Britain Day, I think probably the thing to throw into the mix is it's the day Churchill goes to Park, isn't it? And watches it all happen live.
Yes.
I mean,
with his cigar in his mouth and not
exactly. Where at the modern era, it would all be on screens and like that imagined office Dominic Cummings wants for himself, right? With everyone big screens and all that. But he and of course there's the very famous "What reserves do we have? None." Conversation, and we've talked about this before, and you're kind of like, well, this is we've Churchill's word for this. First of all, and I intend to write the history, blah blah blah, as he said, and certainly he set the tone for an awful lot of the history. What do you think's actually going? He knows perfectly well that in 12 group there's no reserve, that all of 12 groups in the air, but he knows, doesn't he? He's not. One of the things.
Also, I mean, even as I think I mentioned before, even if he did say where are all the reserves, there are none. We don't know what kind of came before that question. What was the rest of the conversation, and what Park actually, the tone of voice in which Park said it. He might have said, he might have just went, "Oh, there aren't any reserves," but that's, I mean, not for me. But there are obviously another 300 aircraft around the rest of the country. So honestly, don't worry, I've got it under control. I mean, this is a deliberate tactic to put everyone up. But it's all going fine. So as you can see, we're engaging, and it's good. And you can hear from the chatter that we're getting because you can hear a lot of the ground controllers can hear what all the radio chatter and stuff. So you can hear what's going on, and you can absolutely see it. I mean, you don't have digital screens and all the rest of it. But you do effectively have that, because the beauty of those operations rooms is that you can see literally everything. You've got a representation of the entire battle, of every squadron. At a glance, you can see the status of each squadron, whether they're engaged, whether they're landing, whether they're taking off, where they are. You can see the croupiers and kind of moving the little plots all over the place. And there it is. I mean, it's a visual feast for the eyes. Of information.
Yes, because the thing is that if you're in the sort of if you're in the business of saying it's the few close run thing and all that, that's your moment that epitomises the battle, isn't it? It's Churchill saying there's no reserve and all that, and him sticking his cigar in his gob and going back to the office. I mean, the thing is he leaves satisfied. So given. Doesn't he? That's the thing. Famously, he leaves Park satisfied with the day's goings. So the fact there is no reserve is fine. It's but
the point is the tactics that Park is employing are absolutely deliberate, and the reason he's suddenly committing all his squadrons at once is because for the first time they're starting to do these. Since the previous Saturday, the 7th of September, the Luftwaffe are starting to target very obviously in large formations. Whereas up until that point, what they were doing is they were doing a scattergun approach, where you've got these sort of little formations of Dorniers and Heinkels sort of hitting multiple different targets at different times at the same time, rather. Yeah. So because he can now predict much more clearly what the Luftwaffe is trying to do, he can mass all his squadrons safe in the knowledge that that once the Luftwaffe turns around again, they're not going to suddenly get caught napping on the ground. Yeah. So it's fine to commit them all. You've got them. You might as well use them. Yeah. I mean, you don't go to, you're not in the middle of a battle on the ground and you suddenly go, well, do I want to commit all my artillery now? Because,
but the thing is, I suppose,
behind. Where are all the artillery reserves? There are none because they're all firing at the Nazis.
But then, the other way of possibly interpreting it is this is a brand new style of warfare, a brand new battle with a brand new style of warfare. Brand new, Park is making it up as he goes along as well. He's got it right, but he is also making it up as he goes along. So it's not necessarily it's not necessarily a given that Churchill would understand what's going on.
No, not at all.
Because after all, he later in the war he doesn't understand why so few men are in the teeth and why there are so many men in the tail. He can't get his head round it. So maybe he can't get his head round what's happening in the Battle of Britain. Maybe it's beyond him because after all, no one has yet. The Luftwaffe certainly haven't got their head round how to fight this sort of battle. And the RAF are arguing while they're fighting this battle how best to fight it. I mean, the big wing, Lee Mallory, this is all evidence of that. That this is all happening right now in the moment. So for Churchill to not understand is sort of completely, I think, is totally contextual, and maybe also just sort of then demonstrates like how good he was at trusting his subordinates. That he says to, all right, if that's the way you want to do it, Park, then you crack on. He doesn't say bring those squadrons down because you've committed your reserve, does he?
No, he's been completely disingenuous. He's implying that this is a life and death struggle, that this is the last, this is, everything's been thrown into it in this last gasp attempt to kind of, send Harry Hunn back across the channel.
Yeah.
And of course, it's completely misleading because, Park might not have any more reserves, but there's plenty more reserves than the rest of the country, as we've already pointed out. I mean, what is really interesting is that, our friend Seb Cox, he got the Air Historical Branch. They commissioned a chap called TCG James to do what is effectively an official history of the Battle of Britain. And I can't even remotely claim that data crunching is anything new to me. I mean, lots of people have been doing it for absolutely years. And TCG James is the guy who went through everything absolutely forensically, all the operational records books, all the kind of group records books, and cross-referenced everything. And so you've got a very, very accurate picture of exactly what's going on. And then when you add that onto that book that I told you about, The Battle of Britain Then and Now, with all the details of the losses and everything, you start to get a very, very clear picture of what's going on. And what he does, what TCG James says about the 15th of September is, it is wrong to speak of this day either as the culmination of the attacks on London or as the crisis in the battle as a whole.
Well, there we go.
There you go. But it's still, still a cracking story, and there's an amazing painting by Frank Wootton of it and stuff, and
it certainly it may well have felt like that at the time. That it was.
Yeah, absolutely. It's over London, isn't it?
Like you say, because it's happening over London, and a bomb lands on Buckingham Palace. So
and a Dornier does get sliced in half, and
crashes on Victoria Station. It's all very all the drama. Right. Okay. Well, I think I think regular listeners will understand perfectly well that we are capable of talking about this forever, but we have to move on. By the way, my Scarlett, my eldest, has been listening, and she's nearly caught up. She went back to the beginning.
Really? That's impressive.
Yeah. I explained to her, though, that the war is not over. Right.
No, there's a long way to run. There's so many little nooks and crannies that we've yet to delve
into.
More.
Right. Okay. So, a bit of.
Oh, by the way, you didn't watch Singapore Grip?
No.
Yeah.
It's about Brexit, isn't it? Isn't it about Brexit? Of course it is. Everything is.
Everything's about Brexit. Everything's about Brexit or Dominic Cummings.
Well, but the Dennis Nielsen drama, I've seen that in the preview thing, the thing with David Tennant, right? And the opening bit, no, but it's like it's all Margaret Thatcher's fault. This bloke being a murderer. It's the subtext. Like, all right, can we just do we have to do this with every piece of drama on the television? This is all very diverting, but we need to do a couple of pieces of parish news. Firstly, we've been promising for ages to put a website together so that all the book recommendations and all our back catalogue of episodes are in the one place, and we've finally done it. Well, yay. I say we. A massive thank you to David Paxton, who in the summer, quite clearly feeling some lockdown boredom, said, "Oh, by the way, I've started on a website for you, if that's all right by you." And he's done a splendid job, particularly excellent service cards for James and I. James is in the RAF, and I'm an airborne soldier, so we're getting to live out our own personal counterfactuals quite deliciously. So massive thank you to David. And like I say, everything's there in place on the site, and there will be more to come on the site. Independent company members will know about what that means, but the regular listeners, your normal podcasters rather than the special podcast listeners, the Patreons, you'll be reaping the benefits as we go. So check out wehaveWaysPod.com, and hopefully you'll find some useful stuff. The book section is particularly helpful and vast, massive, thanks to the brilliant Merrin Walters. And you know what Merrin did? And this is, you see, I always think you can judge the quality of the podcast by the quality of the listener. So we must be pretty special, given what Merrin has gone and done. She went back through every episode, exploring every tangent, the poor woman, and found every book reference. She then provided a description and an overview of them all.
Amazing.
I mean, and her reward for this, love from us all, of course, and her choice of our new range of merch. That's right. There's merch. Yes, regular pod listeners, the merch is finally here. The T-shirt has landed. It's taken us longer than it took Castle Bromwich to sort out the Spitfire production line, but finally our Beaverbrook went in there, kicked some asses, and we've launched some merch. Click on the shop page of the website and have a browse of our range of stuff. Not loads of designs yet, but more to follow. And as you probably regular listeners will know, this podcast has grown organically from me and James sat in my kitchen discussing a paperweight and a radio, and the catchphrases and lines of inquiry have accrued and grown, and so I think the T-shirts and the merch and the whatever else we're going to have will reflect that growth and development. You know, and if let's say we lay off Jim Gavin next year and we get stuck into Maxwell Taylor, maybe. Anyway, so a quick guide to other content we have coming up on Thursday, which is Arnhem D-Day. Of course, we've a very special episode with a general from the Parachute Regiment. How about that? And we ask him. You know, you've been at that level of command. What if you were presented with a dog of a plan like that? And his reply is well worth hearing.
He was very generalish, wasn't he?
He was incredibly generalish. Yes, absolutely. Of course, the chaps did awfully well. It was that sort of thing, and it was marvellous. He was very, very good. It was very, very good. And the thing at the end when I asked him about why do we celebrate, why is Arnhem the defeat celebrated more than Normandy the victory in the airborne pantheon, was really interesting, especially about when he first joined airborne forces in the early 70s. Basically unbelievable what he said. Really, really interesting to hear. Then next week, get this. Right, we've an extraordinary double episode. Can you believe it, man? Oh, it's incredible. We have an extraordinary double episode with the legendary AC/DC frontman Brian Johnson, who, we discovered that Brian was filling his long Florida car journeys with endless episodes of We Have Ways of Making You Talk, so we thought we'd get him on the show. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say Brian not only performed half a dozen parachute jumps in the TA, but he's got an unbelievable family history that includes the Durham Light Infantry, the DLI on his dad's side, and an Italian fascist past on his mother's family side. It was amazing, wasn't it, James? It
was so good. Honestly, I mean, it was just fascinating, but also it was just so funny. I mean, he was brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah. And an extraordinary mimic as well. So you get all these voices, and he speaks Italian because his mother's Italian. So he's such a fascinating guy, and really interested in knowing. Well, he wants to know because his dad didn't talk about the war. His dad wasn't a demonstrative man, I think it's fair to say. Yeah. And he wants to know, doesn't he?
He wants to fill in the gaps, doesn't he?
Yeah, he wants to know what happened to his
father. Down to Egypt.
That's right.
It's just, oh God, it was just so brilliant. And also, the whole thing was completely surreal, wasn't it? Because you were sitting around this table with a rock legend. Yeah. I mean, you know, Back in Black is, let's face it, the second best-selling album of all time.
I know.
Ever.
I know.
It's and there insane. He is.
Now,
I still want to know how he sings like that, though.
Well, we never did ask him, did we?
Yeah, but we went to the pub with him. Can you believe it?
We did.
Sitting there having kind of, pie and mash.
But he's telling his stories about Donald Duck Dunn and all that. Anyway, however, sweet listener, it's not one to listen to with your children unless you're extremely broad-minded, slack parent like I am. There's what's known as industrial language of a sexual nature. But do not miss Brian Johnson next week. We've split it into two parts, so it's really good.
It's not offensive, though, is it?
No, because
he doesn't use those words in an offensive way.
No.
It's just part of the lingo.
It's the mayonnaise in the sandwich, in the conversational sandwich. It adds a little bit of flavour. Some correspondence then. And this came via email, so form your own conclusions about the vintage of our correspondent. John Johnson from Liverpool says, just listening to your excellent Battle of Britain episodes, and I heard you mention the bombing in Liverpool. As mentioned, Liverpool was heavily bombed due to its docks, and as a result, both of my parents were bombed out of their homes. In my dad's case, this was an absolute blessing. Like much of Liverpool's working population, both of my parents lived in buildings which aspired to slumdom, despite this being the 30s. After returning from being evacuated, they were rehoused in temporary housing until new homes were constructed in the 50s, with no tiers for their previous homes. Incidentally, mass observation reports on civilian morale after heavy bombing reported that Liverpool, alone amongst British cities, had no noticeable decline in the morale. despite the pounding, and ascribed this to the fact that there was a high proportion of merchant seamen, or the merch as they're called in Liverpool, and also that people's living conditions were already so uniquely bad that bombing was no extra hardship. God, bloody hell.
I don't get the point about, but why would the high proportion of merchant seamen?
Well, they're tough people, aren't they? They're tough. Merchant seamen are tough people. They're tough people who, literally, worse things happen at sea, James. Literally.
Yeah, okay, point taken. Yeah. But, I mean, Liverpool was really run down, wasn't it, in the 1930s?
Yeah.
There's that brilliant book by Juliet Gardner on the 1930s, and, it's Britain in the 1930s, and it's just... Yeah. It is such an eye-opener. Yeah. It certainly wasn't all Brideshead, that's for sure, and Evelyn Waugh. Yeah. I mean,
it is interesting, though, isn't it? Because an awful lot of British cities bordered on slum, didn't they?
Yeah, and Glasgow as well. The Gore.
Glasgow, yeah, and that then feeds into the mood in the war that then when the Beveridge report comes out, people go, all right, then okay, there is a social contract here, and you're going to honour your side of it, and part of that is to make sure that people don't have to live like this anymore. Yeah, and Liverpool, of course, as a red city and all that sort of thing. It's interesting that you end up with the Conservative government effectively having to do something about this, when normally it would try and avoid doing this sort of thing at all cost, unless there's votes in it, of course. Right, now. Here's another one. An extraordinary question from one of our independent company members in Ireland, Ricky Hayes. Independent company members to a casual listener. That's someone who's on our Patreon, where you get the live cast and all sorts of exciting stuff. And you get first dibs on the merch. Right, and book offers and all that sort of thing. I mean, we're like the modern frontier of cottage industry capitalism here, James. Hi, guys.
We make it worth its while.
We certainly do. I love the pod, and Thursday's now my favourite day of the week. Oh, bless you. I watched a documentary today and heard something incredible about the Second World War. Apparently, the Americans found out that Hitler was proposing to invade South America. This was before Pearl Harbor. Have you any insight into this? Ricky Hayes, Loughin Island, County Down.
Ricky, I really think that's just a bad doc you've been watching, I'm afraid. I don't think there's any truth in that at all. I mean, just think about it. How the hell are they going to do that? I mean, it's interesting. There's no mention of it in any Warlimont. Walter Warlimont was the head of plans for the OKW, Oberkommando de Wehrmacht, the Combined Services General Staff, and there's just no mention of it at all. There's no mention of South America or anything like that. So they're the guys that be doing it, and first of all, they don't have much of a surface fleet. B, they don't have any landing craft. C, South America is about as far as where you can possibly go if you're Germany. D, you've got to get through the blockade.
Couldn't you look at this the other way round, though? Is this not the Americans freaking out that with France falling, that everything? It's the thing.
No, it was Mike Nyberg, wasn't it?
Yes, it was Mike. So maybe this is a sort of fractal of that idea that the Americans are thinking strategic balance has changed here. What do we do about that? But I don't think, I mean, what are they invading South America for anyway? The corned beef. I mean, the corned beef. That's what they're invading South America for. Perfectly sensible.
They want the Fray Bentos factory.
Well, after all, OXO, Liebig's reduction of bone stock thing, that was an Anglo-German venture in Paraguay. And when the First World War came, they decided that they were no longer an Anglo-German venture; they were an Anglo venture, and dropped the German end of the business. The people that made OXO. Anyway,
it's very difficult. It's very difficult with TV docs, though, because an awful lot of it is just absolute wibble, and you don't have the checks and balances that you get with publishing something where you just. I mean, a documentary, how it gets. I mean, I was working on these documentaries about, and I started working with this guy. And this guy employed me to write the scripts of these documentaries, and then kept changing them to just absolute nonsense. And I said, well, look, you can change that, but that is no longer true. And if that's true, I didn't really want to put my name to it. And he went, okay, you're fired.
Really?
Yeah, basically, yes. I went, okay, fine. You know, he was trying to. He had this whole agenda for the kind of sort of Germans in the 19. I think it was War Factories. It was called.
Yeah.
It was absolutely bizarre. The whole thing.
Yeah.
And you know, you've got all these little sort of researchers research assistants who come on, and you know, they're straight out of university. And, you know, what would you do if you're trying to kind of sort of get the info quick? You just go straight onto Wikipedia, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Speaking of which, I'm reading a book called Hitler's Monsters, which is about the Nazi predilection for the supernatural. And when I've finished it, we'll talk about it on the podcast. It's really, really interesting. About a thing they call border science, and so the Thule Society and all those people, and where they all get their ideas from, how it all coagulates, and then how it feeds into the Nazi mindset. And it's not you know, they're trying to do magic like in a movie, but it's like how particularly Middle European ideas about the supernatural get fed into Nazi imagery. So, you know, the Jewish people as a sort of vampire and a night walker and all that sort of thing. Right. And they're taking 19th century mythos off the peg and plugging it into their worldview.
So that's not the occult stuff.
There's some occult stuff in it. There's bits of occult. He called it supernatural, the book, rather than occult. And there's a bit in the opening. You know those history books where they say, those sort of scholarly books that go, in this book, in chapter 1, I will be doing this, right?
Yes.
So he does all that in the introduction.
Yeah.
And he says, I've not called it occult because it's not just about that. It's about pop culture ideas about witches and vampires and werewolves. And then, of course, you get the werewolves late at the end of the war and attempt to set this werewolf thing in motion. And what that's drawing on, in old German tradition, werewolves aren't necessarily bad. They're like a berserker animal that's protecting the community.
Right.
And so the Nazis take that, and of course they call them werewolves, like Wehrmacht, defense wolves. So they're punning with it at the same time.
Right.
Anyway, very but when I finished,
Hitler was obsessed with wolves, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course, yeah. That's what he called. That's what he called himself. Yeah. So and so it's all. And Adolf means
and that's
father
tied up with
Forrest,
isn't it? And Wagner and all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah. But when I finish this book, I'll regurgitate some of it. But that's
just a 3-minute little taster of a future conversation.
Well, yeah, there's even stuff about these border science guys who are coming, and they call it border science, which is stuff on the edge of science. So dowsing is a thing that they're really into. Hitler has the Chancellery doused when he moves his office in there, and
really?
There's all that. Yeah. There's all that going on. Right, yep. And then these blokes coming to Hitler and go, yeah, I can build you an anti-gravity machine, and he goes, oh, really? That sounds incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's Kammler, isn't it? What we're talking about?
Yeah, it's Kammler. Kammler and I can't remember the name. Schausberg or something. Is the bloke who says, I can build you an anti-gravity machine, and I'm going to need 800 people from this concentration camp to build it, and he kills them all.
There's that amazing book by Nick Cook called The Hunt for Zero Point. It's absolutely brilliant.
Anyway,
we'll save all that.
When I've finished it, but it's the stuff that gets. It's the fact that there's that you've got all this Aryan mysticism at the end of the night, and Blavatsky and all these sort of people with these crazy ideas. And some of them are coming up with these theories of the world in order to actually be anti-racist, but in the process, create a racist framework that Nazi thinkers and the Nazi thinkers' sort of predecessors pinch and then re-engineer. It's very, very interesting. There's a lot to do with the collapse of Christian religion in the 19th century and people filling the void with new ideas. Anyway, I will. I got a long drive to Norwich today. I might read it all the way there and back, and I will regurgitate when we convene at another time. Anyway, should we do one more question? Let's finish with this one. Here's an interesting message from one of our new listeners called Andrew. My uncle, Harry Oldreeve, was born in Portsmouth and attended Northern Secondary School. He did his apprenticeship in electronics in the dockyard, then progressed to the drawing office. He didn't have to do national service because he was working for the MOD. He ended up in Hong Kong and was incarcerated in a POW camp. When Hong Kong was captured, the Union flag was still flying. Uncle Harry retrieved it and kept it with him during the length of his captivity, hiding it on inspections and sharing the burden with his colleagues. Incredible. Upon release, Uncle Harry returned to the drawing office in Bath. Then he became the drawing office manager back in Portsmouth until his retirement. He married but had no children. My mother said he was a changed man after his time in prison camp. He would never eat rice, would never have anything Japanese in the house, and never spoke about his time in camp.
Wow.
There was a book written in which Harry Oldreeve was mentioned. I've read the book. My uncle would not. That's the flag. Apparently it was given by my Aunt Betty to the Imperial War Museum, Manchester. My mother says the flag has the names of the other prisoners embroidered on it. Incredible.
Wow. I love all this stuff that's coming out of the kind of,
Yeah.
These hidden stories, hidden little gems.
Yeah.
And,
and
it's that thing, isn't it? It's that
I mean, honestly, how fucking dangerous would that be? How dangerous would that be, having that flag?
Oh,
and the trouble, the mortal danger you are in doing that. But God, incredible.
Yeah.
Well,
amazing.
Amazing. Thank you for sending that in, Andrew. And if anyone else has, we just like to know, and we like to, build on this giant stockpile of incredible anecdote, and as well as crunching the numbers, we do like the stories too, don't we, James?
Yeah. I do think we should put some of these anecdotes in a bit on the website, shouldn't we?
Well, I think that's what we got. Now we got a website, thanks to David Paxton. We can, and he's. I think he did a great job. If anyone needs a website doing. Anyway, that's it for today. Battle of Britain Day. We hope you enjoyed it. Where are the reserves? There are none. Yeah, but that's the plan. It's all right. Calm down, Winston.
Where are the reserves? We've got to defeat the Nazis.
See you on Thursday for a little bit of Arnhem with the Paras.
Charlie ho and cheerio.
What's not to like?
Nothing.